I think it's a very fascinating district. Of course, this is my first visit to Poland, so anything I see here is fascinating in many ways. I think, especially in Nowy Port, what I find very interesting is trying to understand the history of the place, when it was created, why it was created, and also how it has developed, and now always being dependent on the harbor and on the port, and now when the port is seemingly being dismantled, also to trying to understand what sort of implications it has to the area, which I feel is going through some changes at the moment. But all in all, I think it's a very beautiful place. Well, I'm always fascinated by the sea. Maybe the importance that the sea has to humans and society. So I'm of course very fascinated with that, but then there's, I guess, a festival when it decides to come to Nowy Port, for example, it has to always ask it a question that who does it want to address? Does it want to address the people who come to see the festival? Does it want to talk with the people who live here? So I think there's a lot of questions to think about for me and for the festival. I'm still basically in a moment where I'm trying to kind of find my angle from where I want to speak and to who I want to speak to. Well, I've never before thought about it in relation to my practice or this word, but of course I could see it in a way that often when I do something, I also want to create a situation where the person who experiences my work encounters maybe a new question or something new in themselves, and therefore maybe we could see it as a way of smuggling like a new thought or new seed into another person. Generally, like smuggling at this time also, it's of course it's a very contemporary question, also reading the news that happens with the EU and what happens in the Mediterranean at the moment, and so I think there's a lot of angles you could actually work with the idea of smuggling. Well, when you say intimate, I think you probably refer to works that I'm mainly known of, I guess. And I've done a lot of sound installations for one person at a time, and these works become very intimate experiences. But I often develop my works in relation to the situation where they're showed, which means that I'm try to be as aware as possible on the circumstances, and therefore also will come to this festival with a very open mind and try to develop a project that would fit very well to these circumstances. So it's always a challenge to make a new work. I think language is always a question of translation, or always a question of misunderstanding and understanding. And already now, of course, when I'm here and trying to figure out, I'm kind of lost in language in some ways. So I think it's something you have to be aware of and just try to work with it. Well, I've done some works that actually did relate to Baltic Sea, but I'm also doing something at the moment. That's a very long story to go into, but I'm actually working with a public art commission in Stockholm for the port area in Stockholm. So, and in this work I will engage people from all the countries that this port has direct contact with. And what inspired me for this work is basically that the Baltic Sea is one of the most polluted seas in the world, and I'm very interested to hear also that we live in a time when future doesn't seem like it offers all the answers that we need. And we live in a time when the future is something that we're maybe a little bit scared of. And so for this particular work, I'm very curious to hear people's visions and ideas about how they actually perceive the future, especially people who actually, with their actions, also directly influence the development of this region. I do have a starting point for a concept, but it also feels that it's a little bit too early to talk about it now, since we're so much in the developing stage, also in the conceptualizing of it, and since everything can still change. Well, at the moment it seems like I'm going more towards sound, very immaterial. Sound is also something sound is a very personal experience, and I'm quite fascinated in sound, like what sort of sounds a place like this has had, what sort of sounds or memories do people who live here carry with them, and maybe that's something we could evoke and play on, maybe.